Hi, and welcome back. Now that we're done going over some basic terminology and introductory information, and that we've talked about planning, the next two presentations are going to talk about the interventions that are used in group crisis intervention. In section 4, we're going to talk about two types of group crisis interventions that are used for the purposes of delivering information. We will talk about crisis intervention techniques which involve interaction between the participants in the next section. The first informational crisis intervention technique we want to talk about is REST information and transition services. This is a relatively new term, and this particular intervention was formerly known as a demobilization. But the name change allows more clear understanding of what happens during a RITS. So what is REST information and transition services? From an informational standpoint, it's a session for staff and emergency operations personnel to deliver information. It is not intended to be used with populations outside of emergency services or the military. And the reason for this is because it is usually used in large-scale disaster or emergency situations where you have teams of rescuers or teams of emergency personnel transitioning into and out of the disaster scene. So one of the things that happens here is providing individuals with an opportunity to rest and to eat. The RITS is often provided at one time for people at the end of the unit's first exposure to a major prolonged critical incident. So the first time people come back from being out in the field at the emergency situation, they're brought together to get a short informational session. So in the world of CISM, the REST information and transition services have the purpose of providing support and information to the operations people at large-scale incidents. So there's basically two parts to this. A short information presentation, usually not lasting more than 10 minutes, and a location for rest, food, and refreshments for the people who have come in off duty to refresh and recover before they may have to go back out to the incident or disaster at which they're working. What happens here is that the people in charge then inform the operational personnel of what's going to happen next. Are they going to be reassigned? Are they going to be sent to the rest station? Are they going to be given an opportunity to sleep, etc.? Now, when a RITS is being given, it's important to remember that you really only need one person to talk because this is being delivered to the emergency personnel and the emergency personnel support teams at a disaster or a large-scale event. There's no efforts here to have a discussion, and usually questions are not taken. It pretty much provides information as to what's the status of the situation, where are you going next, what are you doing next, or are you being placed on a break time, things of that nature. It might also give brief updates as to how the disaster or emergency is progressing. You don't bring any other speakers in other than the CISM individual team member who's there for the purposes of delivering this information. Sometimes the RITS or the short-term informational meeting is presented by the coordinator or the overseer of the disaster team and the disaster operation. Information, instructions, and guidance. This is not a counseling session. This is not a time when we provide in-depth information about mental health situations. And one of the reasons for that is that this is still an ongoing emergency. You want to have peers who are trained in critical incident stress management and peers that are trained in peer support available for anyone who may appear to be in need of some assistance. But generally speaking, the disaster or the emergency is still ongoing at this time, and so it's inappropriate to take actions that would normally be initiated after the event, the disaster, or the emergency is over. Even though things seem to be straightforward a lot of times, you do want to do planning because there are things that need to be thought about in the logistics of delivering the RITs. You need to get your team members together, your crisis intervention team members together to plan. You need to get a schedule of when you are expecting to see the workers arriving and coming in from the scene of the disaster or the emergency. So you know when to have things ready, especially things like food and beverages. Someone on the team needs to be assigned the job of being the liaison with the incident management personnel. In other words, this person is the only individual who should be communicating with the command center in relationship to the CISM team's operations, functions, what they're doing, giving updates, etc. You don't want multiple people attempting to communicate because that tends to confuse things. When you're delivering a RITS, you want to establish a location within reasonable proximity of the incident. Remember, we talked about proximity, immediacy, and we talked about understanding. So right now, the expectancy part of what's happening can be dealt with through individual interventions at the RITS. But right now, we want immediate support in the proximity of the incident. But it doesn't have to be right at that particular location, but it should be close. And your team in the planning needs to assess what are the goals, in other words, what are we trying to accomplish here? And we want to mitigate the impact. And what that means is you want to do things by providing an environment which can tend to help minimize the psychological and emotional effects of being exposed to a large-scale incident. The second of these informational interventions is called a crisis management briefing. So basically, this again is an information delivering process. It works well with groups of people and is designed to deliver information to groups. It works well with what we call heterogeneous groups, which means that you have groups of individuals attending the session from different populations. You might have some rescue people, you might have press, you might have families of victims, you might have administration people, etc., etc. It works fairly well with any event that has a powerful impact on the community. And as you can see on the slide, it's used in a number of different settings. Now, you've seen variations of the crisis management briefing when you've seen press briefings on television involving politicians and other individuals at an emergency. The CMB differs from the RITS in that it is able to be repeated to accommodate huge numbers of people. Remember, this is not targeted just for the emergency responders. This particular technique is targeted to deliver information to larger groups of people from multiple backgrounds. So we can do it multiple times. You can offer it again when new information becomes available. And a good example of some of how that happens is when you see a press briefing about an emergency or a disaster on television, and a governor or a mayor starts out and delivers information, and then has other individuals answer questions or provide announcements about specific subgroups or specific specialty areas. So what we're seeing is that you can use television, radio, internet, whatever, and usually they are provided at intervals during a disaster or an emergency so that updated information can be provided to the larger community of people. Now, as you see in this slide, the CMB can be applied to a variety of different types of individuals: military, emergency services, public dissemination of information. If you're in a scholastic setting, for example, you might have a CMB to deliver information to the rest of faculty and staff about something that happened in the athletic department, etc., etc. Now, the guideline here says 20 to 45 minutes, and we want to be aware that there are times when you may go on television and you'll see an example or what you look at as an example of this, and it tends to go on for a long period of time. that oftentimes is out of control of the CISM team. But generally speaking, people get to a point of saturation after so long, and so you want to control how long it's going to be. And the primary purpose is information, instructions, and guidance for people what to do. So, for example, the role of the CISM team may simply provide guidance and information that individuals should have to recognize the potential effects of a traumatic event and what they could potentially do about it. So here's what happens at a CMB, okay? You provide information and you make sure that your information is correct and factual. And if the mayor or the emergency services director or the chief of police or fire chief or whomever is delivering information, it's that individual's responsibility to make sure that their information is concise and that it is accurate. You want to control rumors. As we all know, especially with social media, rumors can get kind of crazy real fast. So if there are commonly known rumors, this is a good time to dispel them. You want to try to help reduce chaos, and just saying the words, everyone remain calm, may not be effective. But adding things like what individuals can do to protect themselves, what they can do to cope, what's the process of what's going on, etc., helps to prevent panic and chaos. One of the biggest preventers of panic or chaos is knowledge and information. We want to share effective coping skills and mechanisms. We want to provide avenues for follow-up care and potentially referral information, who to contact, maybe where you should call, post a number, things like that. And we want to help engender community morale, and we want to provide a positive, or as positive as possible, environment or situation or reaction so that we can try to show people that there is hope. And the last thing you want to do is to try to help give the people tools or give them information that can help them restore to adaptive function. Now, this is not an interactive intervention. So at this point in time, you're disseminating information and giving people information where to go to help or how to get tools or potentially how to mobilize their own coping tools. The interactive tools come later. So how do you do one of these? Well, first, you assemble the individuals who are going to be receiving the information at the CMB. Could be the team, could be victims, could be the press, whomever. Then you provide accurate information about the incident without providing speculation, without providing unnecessary detail. You anticipate questions or things that people would probably want information about, and you attempt to anticipate the nature of stress reactions that may be beginning to show in individuals who are related to or who have been affected by this incident. And then a short teaching session about a couple of techniques for the group to whom you're speaking. So if you're speaking to EMS people, you may want to give them one set of tools. If you're speaking to the general public, you may want to give them a couple of other select suggestions as to how to manage their stress from the situation. So the presentation on section 4 is pretty short, but we'll have ample opportunities during our day together to practice both delivering RITS information and running a CMB. So it's good to review that information in the book to see what's involved, and then we'll talk more about it when we're together. Thanks for listening. This is the end of section 4, and there'll be another presentation before the quiz.